he went to trial. And the prosecutor, I was granted a meeting with the prosecutor, which I sat down for 2 hours and explained to her my side of what was going on and to find out what our options were, because he had never been in trouble in his life, ever. He was a good kid. I had him involved in stuff, he volunteered, blah, blah, blah. So I said, what we've been offered is a 30-year deal. He can take 30 years or he can not take it. So when I sat down with her, I said, being that he's never been in trouble before, are you going to tell me that you're going to actually try to give him 30 years in prison? She said, Mrs. Pickens, you have 3 options. You can either take the plea deal and he'll get 30 years in prison. You can plead to the mercy of the court.
Americans are capable of achieving extraordinary things when they have the freedom and opportunity to do so. This is American Potential. And here's your host, Jeff Crank.
Well, thanks for being with us for another episode of American Potential. You know, sometimes when something bad happens to someone, they take it and they turn it into something positive. Today's guest has her own personal story, and she uses it to help young people. But also, she found a unique way to have a platform to talk about an issue that has impacted one of her children. She's a loving mom of 5 who homeschooled her children so she could spend more time with them as they were growing up. Her childhood looked much different than her children's because by the age of 16, she was on her own. But as she was growing up, one thing that she loved to do was watch pageants and thought it was so glamorous, but never felt like she could do it. And it wasn't until she was older and a friend convinced her to compete that she realized she was capable. So how did this mom use competing in pageants to help one of her kids? Let's find out. Our guest today is Kelly Haser Pickens, who is the TCP Miss Universe from 2022 and is a grassroots engagement director for Americans for Prosperity. Kelly, thanks for being with us.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about your childhood. It was a lot more difficult than your own children's childhood, right?
Yes, absolutely. So growing up, I had long story short, my parents divorced when I was very young, and my dad took us across the United States, and we lived with him. He didn't know at the time, but my sister and I had endured some not so happy and pleasant things. Our grandfathers, 2 of them, molested us at a young age, and nobody knew that it was even going on. And that was something that stuck with me for a long time because I felt like I wasn't worthy. I didn't mean anything to anybody because of the fact that who would do something like that to a child that was worth anything? So I felt like I was a throwaway person. It didn't come out until later on in life. But having said that, I knew that there was something inside of me that wanted so much more than the life that I was living. I watched pageantry on TV every year, and I just thought it was so beautiful and so glamorous. And that those women up there, they must have so much self-esteem and self-confidence. So I would never be able to do that because that was just not me. And I would watch it and I would think, what if I were to do that one day? So fast forward to 17. Anyone that knows anything about pageantry knows that you can never have been pregnant and you can never be married to enter the Miss system. Well, at 17 years old, I decided that I would do what I wanted to do, essentially, and moved out from my dad. He sent me to live from Washington State to live in Florida with my mom. I was 16 initially. And I decided that when I got there at 17 years old, that I knew everything that there was to know. You know, I was 17 years old. What 17-year-old doesn't know everything?
Yeah.
And decided that I just wanted to be. I wanted to break out of this shell. I was tired of being sad. I was tired of being down. And that I got with my then boyfriend at the time and became pregnant. So at 17 years old, that left me out of any hopes of competing at that level, or so I thought. 18, I had my daughter. 19, I got pregnant again. So by 20 years old, I had a full-fledged family while still essentially a child myself. It wasn't until a friend of mine said, "Hey, come on, let's try this mall pageant." And I said, "Yeah, I'd love to do that, but no, I just don't have the confidence. I don't have what it takes." She said, "Well, please do it for me. It's a small little pageant and you'll give me moral support." And I said, "Okay, let's do it." I did it and I won. And it was at that point that I thought to myself, if I can do this, if I can stand on this stage in front of these people and compete, I can do anything I set my mind to. It wasn't overnight. It didn't happen immediately, but that was my thinking at the time. It gave me the boost and the confidence to know that, well, if I've done this, something that I really didn't think that I could do, what can I do in life? Because I had a lot of different things. I've always had a heart to try to help people, to change things, to make a difference. So I didn't compete again for a while. And I heard about the umbrella system under the Miss Universe, which is the teen Miss, Mrs., and Ms. division. And I decided that I would compete. Before that, I had not one, not two, but three more children.
Wow.
So that left me out of the Miss division way, way back.
Mm-hmm.
That helped to catapult me forward to deciding that there was things in my life that needed to change. Just because I was pregnant and having babies, I had two children and decided that I want more out of life. And when I heard about the umbrella system, that you could still compete, then I was all for it. He and I were still together. I didn't have two dimes to rub together, but I said, you know what? We're going to make it on love, honey. We decided that we would try to make a go of our little family, and I would gain sponsorship to compete, because it is costly to compete, the gowns and the wardrobe and the whole 9 yards. And I did it, and I tried for the Triple Crown, which means you compete in 3 of the major systems and you win. And when I did that, I competed for the Universe title. When I competed for Miss Universe, I won Mrs. USA, unless you got the highest score in the pageant. And that's what I did. So I was elevated to that point to Miss Universe. Had I not got the highest score in the pageant, I would have went on to Seoul, South Korea to compete for Mrs. Universe, which is still under that umbrella. Mm-hmm. So it was kind of bittersweet. I liked the USA title, of course. I did want to go overseas and compete. But it was so rewarding to me to know that I had the highest score. And it wasn't because of looks, because 50% of your score is interview. And you had to have a 5-minute presentation, and you had to tell your life story or whatever you deemed important for your audience to know. So to me, that spoke of what I'd been through in my life and how I'm on the path to getting to where I want to be. Am I there now? No, I'm still not exactly where I want to be. But you know what? Life's about changes and moving on and trying new and different things to get you to where you want to be. And I don't think we should ever settle in being just okay with where we're at.
Yeah.
So I'm changing and evolving and trying to be a better version of myself. And I have fallen. I've come up and I've come down. But I'm still on that trajectory to get to the next level. Yeah.
You know, I want to explore, and that's a fascinating story, but I want to go back to kind of the beginning of that, really. And it seems to me that anytime you have kids who are abused the way you were, it's a difficult, obviously, it's a very difficult, challenging circumstance. And I think people make choices. And I always have said that all of us have some kind of cross to bear. That's a very bad one. Some people have some that maybe aren't as bad, but there probably are kids, obviously, who even had it worse, right? But everybody growing up has a cross to bear, a something in their past that could hold them back. And it really becomes a choice. It becomes a choice. I always call it the choice between choosing to be a victim or choosing to be a victor in life, and kind of making that decision. How did you come about becoming a victor rather than a victim? Because there's lots of kids who probably went through what you did as a young girl who, for the rest of their life, that haunted them and they never got over that. That is the thing that held them back for the rest of their life. Go back to that moment where you think you made the choice to be a victor.
Certainly. Well, in my opinion, I don't think you ever truly get over it. You just
Right.
learn to live, learn to deal with it. And my thing was, I was terribly shy. I was stare at the ground. As a matter of fact, on one of my report cards, it says, Kelly is a very shy child and she probably knows every crack on the sidewalk. But that I was kind to people. And so that's something I think back on because
Right.
being shy back then, I knew I was shy, but I didn't want to be. I wanted to do things. I wanted to be like, quote, normal kids and be able to have friends and to accomplish goals and dreams. But I didn't feel that I could break out of that shell. I didn't know how. I didn't feel like I had the tools to do it. When I competed in that pageant, I'm not going to say that was the end all be all of everything, but that was something that helped to break me out of my shell because I stood up in front of people and I made a good choice, I guess.
Did that give you confidence? Do you think that gave you the confidence to kind of help overcome some of your past?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Right.
That's why I was going to say for others that are going through the same thing, it might not be pageantry. It might be a job. It might be volunteering, going out and into the community and making a difference. Because the thing that's beneficial to me and therapeutic for me is reaching out to people. It's touching other people through either what I've gone through or what they're going through that I might have done or been a part of myself. Because I'm a big believer that you can minister to certain people on different topics, but unless you've truly lived it, you don't have that the same drive or maybe the same ideas of what is going on. So you are the perfect person, having gone through something, to minister to those people that need to be ministered
right.
in only the way that you can.
Sure. Let me ask you this, do you ever have people who judge you based upon who they think you are, that you're a pageant winner, things like that, and maybe don't know the background of your story? I run into that all the time. People will say, "Oh, you had an easy life," or whatever. Well, they don't know me. They don't know what my life was. I'm sure you run into that quite often.
Right. I have run into it before, and I know that there's a general misconception, maybe, for lack of a better word, to how pageant women really are. Because you do have some that are catty, you have some that are superficial, and you have some that have a heart and that really want to make a difference. And in my opinion, I run into more of those than I do people that are in it for the wrong reasons. And I've had people say, all the way back to my yearbook in high school, they signed it saying, "I'm glad I got to know you. I always thought that you were snooty, rude, quiet," because I was still shy for most of the beginning of my high school years. And now people just assume that because I put a crown on my head or I have a sash, that I look down on them or I'm better than them, and I don't.
Yeah. Yeah.
Tell them I'm not the typical pageant queen that you probably have in your mind. I'm down to earth and I am a working queen. So I'm not.
That's right.
I'm out.
Right. Well, so talk a little bit about your kids. Let's talk. So you now have kids because they play a critical part in this this story. So I want to talk about that. Talk about your kids for a minute.
Okay. So after those two, we waited 12 years and we decided that we would do it the right way. That we felt like we had enough love and enough time to spend with more kids than we wanted to add to our family. So we did. And we had the first one was a girl. The second one was a boy. So we thought it'd be nice to either way, boy or girl, to add more. So the third one was a girl. The fourth one was a girl. And the fifth one was yet again a girl. So we loved the fact that we had a big family, and regardless of what we got, we were just happy. Of course, we wanted another boy.
Right.
Our boy was the center of the controversy that became what we're living to this day. So at 19 years old, our son, the only boy in the family, decided that he wanted to move out of the house. We had strong morals, values, and he was my best friend. All my kids were. We homeschooled. I worked on and off, but usually if I worked for law firms and I got off at 3 in time to get my kids. So I did a little bit of both, but my kids were my world. I had them involved in everything because I didn't want them running the streets. I didn't want them to be around the wrong crowd. Maybe I did a little bit too much to try to shelter them, because at 19 years old, my son decided that he wanted to move out of the house, and he had gotten scholarships he was not happy with. Being that he was homeschooled, a lot of people said, oh, he's going to be the next Tim Tebow because he's homeschooled and he's such a good football player. And so his head was pumped up real big, and he thought he was going to get all these scholarships to these places that he was hoping for, and he did not. He got 2 scholarships because his grades were very, very good. The scholarship that he got here in Jacksonville was to a college that didn't have football. And so he decided that he didn't want to do that. He moved out, was out of the house about 5 short months. And in that time, we didn't hear from him much, which was really odd because we were so close. And so Father's Day came, and he said, my husband said to him, you know, son, you don't ever have to come around and see me. If this is what you choose, then so be it. But you're hurting your mom. Because we had these conversations about, he's out and I know he's grown, but it's unusual for him to call and to not really come and hang out. And in 5 months, he came around 2 times. And that was one of them. And he said, son, you're hurting your mom. You should try to come over more often. So he said, okay. So later on that month, he came over. And by that time, I was angry with him. I was sad. I missed my boy. So he knocked on the door. And instead of opening it like I had all the other times and just welcomed him in, I opened it and I just stood there. I said, yes, son, what is it? He said, oh. And he was kind of taken aback. He said, I just wanted to come and talk to you. So I said, okay. And then I let him in. He told me it was that day that he came over to ask if he could move back home. He said he lost his nerve because of the way I opened the door. Mm-hmm. He said that when he was out, he felt like he was not doing right. He was not living by the morals and values and the principles that we had taught him. And so he was very conflicted as to being around us. His heart was heavy. And he said when he came in that day, he lost his nerve and felt like he was just not going to do that. So he had moved in with his girlfriend and her mother. His girlfriend was 17, and the mother was a single mom, nobody working in the house. And he was working part-time at the grocery store, and he wasn't making it. So some guys in the neighborhood said, hey, come on, let's make some fast money. He said, oh, no, I can't do that. They said, you're weak, you're a sissy, you're not going to do it. So he said, I allowed myself to be talked into it. I allowed myself to succumb to the peer pressure that was coming against me. He said, they might have talked me into it, but I have no one to blame but myself. He said, they robbed some people to make some fast money. He got between 6 and 9 charges over a couple of day period because they added different charges for the same offense, such as 2 different cases. They jumped in the car with a pizza delivery driver and they said, give me your money. But whenever a body is moved physically, you get kidnapping charges. So he got robbery and kidnapping charges for those. And then they robbed some other people over a course of 5 days. Now, mind you, the sound of a crime spree sounds bad, and it is. But if he had been charged with a crime spree, he would have been better off than what they gave him. The reason I say that is because some of these cases were committed over county lines. So some of the pizza delivery drivers, one of them was in Duval, and I believe one was in Clay. When you cross county lines, now you've got two counties that you have to stand trial or what have you in. So he went to trial. And the prosecutor, I was granted a meeting with the prosecutor, which I sat down for 2 hours and explained to her my side of what was going on and to find out what our options were, because he had never been in trouble in his life, ever. He was a good kid. I had him involved in stuff. He volunteered, blah, blah, blah. So I said, what we've been offered is a 30-year deal. He can take 30 years or he can not take it. So when I sat down with her, I said, being that he's never been in trouble before, are you going to tell me that you're going to actually try to give him 30 years in prison? She said, Mrs. Pickens, you have three options. You can either take the plea deal and he'll get 30 years in prison. You can plead to the mercy of the court and let the judge sentence you however he would like, or you can take it to trial, in which if you do take it to trial, I will try to throw the book at him and I will give him life. So I was crushed. Mm-hmm. I thought, I have no idea anything about the criminal justice system, never been involved in it, never had to worry about how to tell my son how to plead. And come to find out, not only in Duval County, we had to go face the same thing in Clay County. So once again, I met with the Clay County prosecutor and I said to him the same thing. And he said, his words to me were, your son had to have had some pretty big kahunas to do what he did in the area of town he did at the time of day he did. Now, what he did was wrong, and I'm not trying to sit here and say what he did was right, but God forbid I was on drugs, because he said they gave him something to smoke, a marijuana cigarette that was laced with white something. He said he took it willingly because he knew he couldn't do what he did without being on something. So if, God forbid, I were on drugs, which I'm not, and I'm against it, I wouldn't care what area of town it was in, except for to say I wouldn't go to the ghetto to rob somebody. Mm-hmm. You know? And right. Time of someone's on drugs, I don't think they're really thinking about what time of day it is, right? So I said, well, I've done research. I've got 7 cases to bring before you right now to ask you why you would still want to give him that much time when every one of these 7 cases, the most time they got was 4 years. Mind you, these cases were committed within a 2-year period, so he couldn't say that was old. They were in the exact same county, and they were basically the same story as my son's. He said, well, the first was black on black crime. That's why that was charged so low. I was in disbelief. The second one was closed business. The third one was a Mexican and something. I had heard enough. I mean, you're telling me these are throwaway cases. That's why they only got a little bit of time, I'm assuming. I don't know. I said, I just don't understand how you can essentially take a youth's life when nobody was physically touched whatsoever. Nobody's hands were laid on. Give him time because we believe he's guilty. We believe he deserves punishment. He believes he deserves punishment. But to take his whole life when he's had a clean record, nobody was physically touched, give him the normal amount of time. Because some of the facts of the case are, he was one of the youngest in the prison with probably 95% more time than the murderers, the child molesters, the rapists. All of them will be out before him unless they got an actual life sentence. Mm-hmm. So they sentenced my son to 40 years in prison, 40 years in prison on a first offense.
Did he take the plea or they sentenced him?
He did not. He pled to the mercy of the court.
Okay.
So
and they gave him 40 years.
They gave him 40 years.
Wow.
More time than what they were going to offer him if he had taken the plea deal.
Wow.
because his girlfriend got 2 years under her plea deal, and she's been out. Because they said no, none of the victims could identify my son except for one who said there was one that was well-spoken. So they gave her a plea deal saying if he comes back and says it wasn't him, I guess come forward and say it was, and we will give you 2 years, and that's what happened. But he spilled his guts from the time they arrested him, because that's what, he felt like he needed to do, I guess.
Right.
I don't want to for him. Nobody should ever endure what these victims have endured.
Sure.
And he's gotten punishment. He scored out, it's called a score. He scored out to 8.5 years. He also qualified by no stretch of the imagination, no strings pulled, to what's called the youthful offender status. So we have in Jacksonville what's called the youthful offender program, where you have to qualify by stringent demands, which are 19 years and below, never been in trouble before, good standing in the community, and a few other things. He qualified for all of those. Every single one of those was him. So the judge had it in his power to give him the youthful offender program, which I believe is 6 years in a youth camp, or however he saw fit. So not only did he qualify for the youthful offender program, he also scored out to 8.5 years. But yet, he and the other guys got at least 40 years. The other guy later got 20 because he wasn't in the last one, I guess. And the other guy got 50 years because he has been in and out of juvenile and jail since he was a youth. So I guess he was kind of balled up and sentenced all together.
Right.
So should not be charged at all. I'm fighting for fairness within the justice system. So
you believe that based on this score, that he should have gotten about 8.5 years?
Well, anytime less than 40 years, I don't know. In my heart, I feel like it should have been, they should have gone by the guidelines. Yes. Right. 8.5 years camp or something that he qualified without me being, oh, poor mom, you just don't want him doing time. No, I want him to do time. I want him to realize what he's done, even though I never, million years, pictured him ever doing that and never would picture it again. But if you commit a crime, you should do the time. But the time should be equivalent to what the law says you should do.
Right.
Not because I'm so-and-so judge and I feel like this is how I want to sentence you this day. Because fast forward to the Clay County trial, he said, I'm just going to piggyback off of what Duval County did, and I'm going to give him 40 years also. And on top of that, now he's considered a repeat offender, even though this was the string. So to fight in one county, if we were to get anything done there, we still have to fight the second county.
Right. Right. Well, now, during this time, by the way, you decided to continue to compete in pageants, right? Why was that important for you to do that?
Well, I decided to compete because I obviously have a love for pageantry and just the fun of pageantry. But the sad thing is, depending on who you are, certain people will listen to you and certain people won't. But it's like once you put that sash on or you put a crown on your head, everybody wants to hear what you've got to say before even knowing what you've got to say. It's sad, but it's true. So I felt like I could bring a bigger voice to the youth that are thinking I can just get a slap on the wrist and I'll be in and out and nothing will happen to me. A bigger voice for parents who are going through what we go through even today on a day-to-day basis. I just visited him in prison yesterday. And to just show the criminal justice system that we in America, we need a change. I'm not saying let criminals go free, but there's too much gray area. There's not enough. If you do this, this is what you get. If you do that, that's what you get. In other words, it depends on personality. It depends on who I am as a person, how I'm going to score you and how I'm going to not score you, but how I'm going to sentence you. And that's not right. How do you give someone 2 years and give somebody else 40 years? How do you give a murderer 10 years that actually physically took a life and you give him 40 years when nobody laid a hand on anybody? How do you molest and abuse, rape and murder children and get less time than you gave him when nobody's
Mm-hmm.
body was physically manipulated in any way.
Yeah. Is there an appeal of his sentence?
There was.
Mm-hmm.
They've all been denied. Apparently, and this is hearsay, but apparently, I believe the prosecutor was one of them that said it, but either the best friend or the neighbor, one of the victims was a best friend and a neighbor or a neighbor of the prosecutor. So it's just like you and I, if we have a friend that's been wronged, we're going to want to right that wrong for that person.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? So in other words, he may have sentenced him a little harsher just because he knew the person. I don't know.
Well, what should happen is you should recuse yourself and give it to another attorney or another prosecutor in the office and stay away from it. That would be what I would do, but that would seem to be the right thing to do. Let me ask. So, go ahead.
I was just saying, but you will never get the truth.
Right.
He sentenced him the way he felt fit, and that's essentially that's all you can.
Yeah. So you've been able though to work on some criminal justice issues based off of kind of your experiences there. What have you been working on?
Well, I'll tell you, it's a little bit of criminal justice, but I'll tell you what, it's given me the drive to want to pursue it even further because I feel like there's so many silent voices that don't get heard. And just like I felt like, how can this happen? I'm no better than anybody else. But how can my son, someone that was raised so well, he wasn't from a broken home, he wasn't a street runner, he wasn't into drugs and alcohol and, this and that. He was a good kid. He was just an average, normal kid. So how can someone like me that was a stay-at-home mom for the most part have a bigger voice to say, hey, this is wrong? I didn't know. Pageantry was the beginning. Joining with the company that I work for now, Americans for Prosperity, was the bigger voice that I felt could help move forward with my wanting to change criminal justice reform. Because you're not alone. You have other people that are like-minded that want to see change. We've done some things with the educational system, such as educational savings accounts for kids who don't want to go to school that they're in because they're either bullied or whatever reason. Now the money that was allotted for that child at that school can follow that child to another school. And us as homeschoolers back in the day that paid all the taxes and what have you, that never got a portion or anything out of it, are now able to get money for school as well, which I feel is only fair. I some other criminal justice people in the past, and we did what was the C1, the restoration of rights. Sorry, I can't think of it off the top of my head, but restoring rights for prisoners back out. Now we're trying to restore rights of people that come in from other states that have medical licenses, or they're barbers, or any kind of licensure. They're able to work from here without having to go back to school. So that's what we're working on now currently. But it gives me a drive to partner with people. And now that we have other people that are like-minded that want to see a change and want to see things happen, I don't have to sit on the couch and just be sad or just want, what can I do? What can I do? Who can I talk to? Who can I touch? Because even now, having said that, I've gone from everywhere from Washington, D.C. to Miami, talking to senators, and I haven't spoken with Governor DeSantis personally about my issue yet, but there's been no stone unturned that I haven't tried to reach and find a way to help my son and the other people that are suffering from criminal injustice. Do you realize that we have the largest number of youth sentenced as adults in the entire country? Some even as young as 10 years old in the entire country. We currently have
in Florida.
In Florida. We
Uh-huh.
currently have 4,000 youth sentenced as adults in the state of Florida.
Yeah.
Because Florida is in rehabilitation, in my opinion. We believe in locking them up and throwing away the key, and the ones that get out early are just as bad, if not worse, as when they come out.
Right. And
And let me,
there are some, you would
we
admit
don't
that there
have,
are some who should be thrown away or thrown in, and the key should be thrown away. There are some people that should happen to, right?
absolute the
Right.
murder. If you take a life, I don't want to get into that whole thing, but if you take a life, I mean, you should you should be doing some time. If
Right.
you take anything from anybody, if you even what he did, my son did, if you rob somebody, you need to be put away. But it should be
Right.
fair.
Right.
Most of our listeners probably don't know this, but we no longer have parole in the state of Florida unless you were grandfathered in before 1986. So if you were incarcerated after 1986, we still have what's called time off for good behavior. So in other words, if my son continues to be good, then he, instead of doing 40 years, he will do 35 and a half years, because you have to do 85% of your sentence at least.
Yeah.
Being good that entire time, of course. But there's
Right.
no incentive for these people, in my opinion, to do better while they're in prison, the ones that need the incentive, because they're not going to get out on parole. They have nothing to look forward to, even if they're bad while they're in prison, which they are. You've got bad people in prison, of course, that come out, that are let out of prison to be around you and I, to do whatever they've done in the past instead of being rehabilitated. They need rehabilitation. They don't need to sit there and just conjure up ways to be worse.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. How is your son doing? I know it's obviously a difficult situation, but how is your son doing?
Well, yesterday was nice, as much as it could be under the circumstances. It's his birthday Tuesday, so I went to celebrate it with him. And he says that there was a gang member that was sitting across from us, and he said he's a very well-known gang member. He's the head of, I'm not going to say the name because it really doesn't matter. He was the head. And so I said, he looks very mild-mannered. He's just sitting there talking to his girlfriend. There's no, he didn't seem pompous or arrogant or like a gang member, like I would think. And he said, that's because you have to be. And I said, what does that mean? He says, because he essentially rules the prison. He's got people under him that if something goes wrong, he just snaps his fingers and he'll have two people running to do whatever they. And I said, I want to ask you something, son. I said, because a lot of people join gangs because they want protection. They want to be part of a family. Why are you not in his gang or a gang? Because there's 3 major gangs that are in that prison, probably in every prison. And he said, because it's false hope. He said, and nothing is ever given without something being taken away.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, they will turn on you in a second. If you do something to one of them that makes them angry, or they think you've done something or said something about somebody, the guy will snap his fingers and have them take you out just like anybody else. So he said, it's false hope. It's not, they're not going to do something for you without expecting something from you. He said, so I just lay low. I don't want to be involved in all that. He said, I take every job that I can out here so that I can get away from that. He said, after they wake us up about, I think he said 5 a.m. for breakfast. So after breakfast, he goes back in and gets himself ready. He said he has a schedule every day. So what he does is he goes out and works in the grounds. He cuts the grass, he works in the flower beds, what have you. He said, because it makes him feel more like he's not confined and that he's not in actually there. And he said, it's a privilege to work in the kitchen. And people want to work in the kitchen because, of course, you can eat a little bit more. Mm-hmm. So he loves working in the kitchen when he's able to do that. He said, I made the best salad the other day, blah, blah, blah. He said, but I was reprimanded because as I'm doling out in scoops to the inmates, I was told, shake it. What does that mean? He says, when you're doling out the food, you have a ladle, and that's their portion. And that's what each inmate's supposed to get. But as I'm doing that, I'm told, shake it. He said, because they want you to shake some of the product off so that there's less on the spoon and that it can stretch farther.
Mm.
So the inmates are in return angry, and they say, why are you shorting me? And we don't get enough to eat. And, he said, so
yeah,
he'd rather work outside. Long story short, it's rough.
Right. Yeah. Very difficult environment to live your life in. And that's difficult. How often do you get to do a phone call with your son?
Well, I'll tell you, for 8 years straight, I talked to him. He's been in 15 years, by the way. So for 8 years straight, we talked to him every night, and it's called keeping money on the phone. So if you keep money on the phone or on his books, he's able to call. But the family, of course, has to pay for it.
Mm-hmm.
So for the first in there, he called every single day. We never missed a day. Christmas came, and it started to be only a couple of times a week. Then it was once a week, once a month, and then it started spreading out. And up until that point, he was very positive and upbeat, and he kept me going because I was still in shock and disbelief that you could essentially take a child's whole life when, a life wasn't taken. But anyway, he would keep me uplifted. And I think Christmas time was the kicker because he was missing home, he was missing family. And he would say things like, if I had just thought about what I was going to do before I did it, if I had just thought about you, my dad, my sisters, the victims, I never would have done it. He said, now I'm in here and that's all I have time to do is think.
Wow. Profound.
So he's had to really, he's had time to just think about his whole life and realize that he wished, even though we were so tight knit and close, that he would have talked to us. He would have not just moved out because when he moved out, we still had rules, even though he had just turned 19 years old. We still had rules.
Right.
He said, taking time to think.
Yeah. Wow. Well, Kelly, thank you for joining us, and thanks for telling your story. And we appreciate it. I will pray for your son and for your family. That's just a difficult situation for him and for you. But, inspiring story. Again, you rising from some of the difficulties you had in your life and raising a family and continuing with those difficulties and confronting them head on. So thank you for joining us and for telling your story.
Thank you. Like I said, I'm not where I want to be. I'm on my way. But if I can inspire anyone to just pick up where they're at and move ahead with their life one step at a time, then it's all worth it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Well, again, thank you, Kelly. Appreciate it.
Sure.
This is such an inspiring story. We hear these things all the time. And Kelly's story of, abuse in her childhood and rising from that and becoming, competing in pageants, becoming a queen. That all comes from perseverance. And as I mentioned, people always make a choice. There's also the end of this story and her son, her telling us of her son, I wish I would have thought about those things. I wouldn't have committed the crime if I would have thought about the victims, if I would have thought about my family. And now all I have is time to think about that. And that's a pretty profound statement. But how many people find themselves in that same situation? Someone who in the blink of an eye decides to drink and drive and pays for it, maybe for the rest of their life, or, God forbid, takes someone's life and then has to live with that fact. So it talks about just sort of the responsibility that we all have to think about what we do and think of the impacts of the things that we do every single day on other people's lives. But an inspiring story nonetheless. And again, Kelly is committed to making change and to bringing about change in her community. And I would encourage you to do the same thing. Don't take liberty and freedom for granted. Go out there, defend freedom and liberty. Thanks for joining.
Thank you for listening to American Potential. You may listen to more stories from Americans working every day to expand freedom and opportunity in their communities by visiting AmericanPotential.com.